Okay, this is number 8 from Are You Ready for Calculus? And basically what we want to do is we want to write these the different equations they give you in this form, which is basically the general form for a parabola. And we actually have the coordinates of the vertex here, A and B. And you can also write it in this form, depending on which way it is. If it's a parabola, it's going to be like an x squared, it's going to be like this. If it's a parabola like with a y squared, it's going to be like that, depending on whether this A is positive or negative. If it's positive, it's faced up. If it's negative, down. If it's positive, it's faced right. Or if it's negative, it's faced left. All right, and we'll talk more about those when we start graphing these parent functions. Those are very important, both of them. So first of all, we want to get this in that general form so we can actually find the vertex, because that will be the coordinates of the vertex. Okay, so first of all we'll do is isolate this. And I'll just subtract y from both sides. So I've got y minus 3 equals x squared plus 4x. And I just have to complete the square. Now what I usually do is I usually write these little numbers up on top. So this is x. And then half of 4 is 2. And 2 squared is 4, so that's what I add to both sides. So I add 4 here, and I add 4 there. And this ends up being y plus 1 equals, and then this is going to be the binomial squared, and that's going to be my sine, my SIGN, my sine. And the numbers that go here are just going to be the x and the 2. But they want it in this form with a negative sign, so we can actually find the coordinates of the vertex easier. So this is going to be actually, my answer would be y minus negative 1 equals x minus negative 2, and that whole thing squared. So that's the form they would have that in. Okay, so that's 8a. Okay, 8b. This is going to be a little more complicated. 3x squared plus 3x plus 2y equals 0. So again, we'll isolate this, and we'll try to get this in kind of in this form it looks like, the y minus b. So I'll put the 2y on the left. And that equals negative 3x squared, negative 3x. Now I want to complete the square here. I'll deal with this too a little bit later, but I want to complete the square here. So I have my 2y over here. And so but when I complete the square and I take half, that situation I did where I just take half of this number, that's as long as the coefficient of the square term is 1. So I'm going to factor out this negative 3 so I can complete the square a little bit easier. X squared plus x. Now this is the same thing. I just factored out the negative 3, but now I can find this number by just taking half of the coefficient of the x. Now again, the square root of x squared is just x, so that goes up here. It'd be a little bit harder if it was negative 3. Okay, and then what's half of 1? 1/2. So that's what I'm going to add to both sides. That's squared. So what's 1/2 squared? 1/4. So that's what I add to both sides. Okay. Made a little mistake because I didn't really add 1/4. What did I add? Well, this is preceded by a negative sign, so I'm actually adding negative 3 times 1/4. So that's negative 3/4. Pardon me. So basically I'm adding negative 3/4 because this is preceded by a negative 3. So be careful on that one. Okay. So now we have 2y minus 3/4 equals negative 3. And now I've got this is a trinomial square. This is my sine. And the numbers that go in here are those little red numbers on top, x plus 1/2. Okay. Now in this form up here, we look at the original form, the form that we want, I should say, the form that's dictated by the question. We want just y minus b, not 2y, so we have to get rid of this 2. So I can factor out the 2, or divide it by 2, and that's going to give me a y there. And then if I divide this by 2, it's like multiplying by 1/2, so it's going to be negative 3 over 8. And you can always check that out. If I multiply this, I get 2y minus 6 over 8, which is 3/4. So that's nice. And negative 3 times x. And now remember we wanted this in the negative form, so I'll write this as negative 1/2. That's the same thing, squared. And there's your final answer. Almost. But if we look up here, we don't want anything in front of the y, so we have to get rid of this 2. Now this a here can be any number, so we're okay there. So what we'll do is just divide everything by 2. Then we'll get our final answer. Pardon me. And that's going to be 2, that's going to be y minus 3 over 8 equals negative 3 over 2. And then we have this x minus negative 1/2 squared. We want to use brackets there because we have brackets and parentheses. So there you go. And that's your final answer. So there's a little bit more to that one. Okay, and the last one, or the last part of this one, letter C. C. We had this equation, 9y squared minus 6y minus 9 minus x equals 0. And again, remember, I'm looking at these forms. We'll go back and look at the forms we had over here. We have to get in one of these two forms. So what I'll do is I'll get the x and the 9 on the left. So I'm going to look for this form here, because my square is going to be in the y. So I'm going to have one of these parabolas that's shaped like a C or a backwards C. Okay, so what I'll do is move this to the right and kind of flip it. So I'll have 9y squared minus 6y equals x plus 9. And then I'll just kind of flip them so it looks more like that form. So I have x plus 9 equals, and I'm going to, well, I'll just write it out first. 6y. Okay, now I want to complete the square. I'll be able to deal with this all right, but I want to complete the square over here. So again, we can't have a number in front of here. It's going to be kind of hard to take half of that because it doesn't work unless there's a 1 in front of that square term. So we'll rewrite this as x plus 9 equals, and I'll factor the 9 out, and I've got y squared. And then if I divide by 9, I'm dividing this by 9. If I divide 6 by 9, I get negative 2/3. Okay. Okay, now once I have it like this, now I can take half of this because I've got a 1 in front of my y squared. That's the tricky part. So my little number here will be y. And then what's half of 2/3? Half of 2/3 is 1/3. So what I'm going to add to both sides is 1/3 squared. Okay, we take half that number squared, so that's going to be plus 1 over 9. But what did I really add? I didn't really add 1/9. I just added 9 times 1/9, which is 1, so I'm really just adding 1 to both sides. Okay? So now I've got x plus 10 equals 9 times, and then I've got a perfect square here, and then this is going to be a negative sign, and my little red numbers go there. Pardon me, it should be negative. And the red numbers are going to be y plus 1/3, or y minus 1/3, pardon me. And then again, we wanted that in the negative form, so the last adjustment I have to make is x minus negative 10 equals 9 times y minus 1/3 squared, and there we have it. And that's the form you wanted it. Okay? So those are a little more complicated just because of the adjustments here of factoring this 9 out. Okay, I hope that makes sense.